The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Challis, Idaho, when Hannah Lawson first arrived in town. Her belongings packed in a single weathered trunk and her voice locked away inside her throat. The year was 1878, and like the rugged mountains that surrounded the mining settlement, Hannah's silence stood as an immovable barrier between herself and a world that had little patience for those who were different. The stagecoach had deposited her unceremoniously outside the general store, the driver barely waiting for her to gather her trunk before snapping the reins and continuing his route. Hannah stood alone, clutching the letter from her late uncle's solicitor that promised her a modest inheritance, a small cabin on the outskirts of town, and enough money to survive for a few months while she decided what to do with her life. People passed by, some offering curious glances, others pretending not to notice the slender woman with chestnut hair and eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories she couldn't tell. Hannah had been mute since birth, a condition that had made her an oddity in her hometown back east. After her parents' deaths from influenza the previous winter, there had been nothing to keep her there, nothing but pitying looks and whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered a room. She hefted her trunk and began walking in the direction the stagecoach driver had pointed, toward the solicitor's office where she would collect her uncle's keys and papers. The weight of the trunk strained her arms, but she refused to abandon her few possessions, even for a moment. "Need a hand with that, miss?" Hannah turned to see a tall man with broad shoulders and kind eyes the color of a summer sky. His weathered hat shadowed his face, but she could see the hint of a smile beneath his neatly trimmed mustache. Dust covered his boots and denim trousers, suggesting he'd ridden in from somewhere outside town. Hannah hesitated, then gestured to her throat and shook her head apologetically. The man's brow furrowed. "Can't speak?" he asked, his voice gentler now. She nodded, relief washing over her that he'd understood so quickly. "Well, that's no problem at all. My question still stands. Need a hand with that trunk. Looks mighty heavy for one person." Hannah smiled gratefully and nodded again. "The name's Thomas Caldwell," he said, lifting his hat briefly before taking the trunk from her hands. "Most folks around here call me Tom. Where are you headed?" Hannah pulled a small slate and chalk from her handbag tools she'd carried since childhood and quickly wrote, "Mr. Peterson's office." "I'm Hannah Lawson." Tom read the slate and smiled. "Old Peterson's expecting you then? I'm headed that direction myself. Just got back from delivering some cattle to the Clayton Ranch." He gestured down the street with his free hand. "This way, Miss Lawson." As they walked, Tom maintained a casual conversation, asking questions she could answer with nods or by writing brief responses on her slate. His ease with her condition was refreshing. Most people grew uncomfortable quickly, not knowing how to navigate a conversation without verbal replies. "You're new to Challis," he observed. It wasn't a question, but Hannah nodded anyway. "Here to stay or just passing through?" Hannah wrote quickly. "My uncle left me his cabin. I'm staying, at least for now." "Joseph Lawson was your uncle?" Tom asked, surprise evident in his voice. "He was a good man, kept to himself mostly, but always willing to help a neighbor. I'm sorry for your loss." Hannah nodded her thanks. They had reached the solicitor's office, a narrow building wedged between the town's only hotel and a haberdashery. Tom set down her trunk. "Well, Miss Lawson, welcome to Challis. If you need anything, I'm usually around. My ranch is about 3 miles northwest of town." He touched the brim of his hat and turned to leave. Hannah hurriedly wrote on her slate and tapped his arm to get his attention. When he turned back, she held up the slate. "Thank you for your kindness." Tom's smile warmed his entire face. "No thanks needed, Miss Lawson. That's just how we do things out here." As he walked away, Hannah watched him go, struck by the casual decency of his gesture. In a world that had often treated her difference as a burden, Thomas Caldwell had made it seem inconsequential. The meeting with Mr. Peterson was brief and businesslike. The elderly solicitor explained the terms of her uncle's will, handed over the keys to the cabin, and provided directions. He arranged for the local livery stable owner to drive her there, along with her trunk. "Your uncle was well respected," Peterson told her, speaking slowly as if she might not understand him. "Bit of an eccentric, living so far from town, but he paid his taxes and kept to himself. The cabin's simple but solid, should serve you well." Hannah wrote a question on her slate. Did he have friends in town? Peterson adjusted his spectacles. "Not many, to be honest. He wasn't much for socializing, came to town for supplies once a month or so." He hesitated. "Forgive my directness, Miss Lawson, but have you considered that living alone with your condition might prove difficult?" Hannah's spine stiffened. She'd faced this concern countless times before. She wrote firmly, "I've been managing my entire life, Mr. Peterson." The solicitor had the grace to look embarrassed. Of course. I meant no offense." The cabin was indeed solid, though smaller than Hannah had anticipated. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pines with a small creek running nearby. The livery stable owner, a gruff man named Jenkins, helped her carry her trunk inside, tipped his hat without a word, and departed, leaving Hannah truly alone for perhaps the first time in her life. The cabin consisted of a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a single bedroom. Everything was neat but dusty, suggesting no one had entered since her uncle's death 3 months earlier. Hannah spent the remaining daylight hours cleaning and arranging her few possessions, then lit a fire in the fireplace as the mountain chill crept in with the setting sun. As she sat before the fire, a strange mixture of freedom and loneliness washed over her. Back east, her parents had been loving but overprotective, treating her muteness as a disability that required constant supervision. Here, she was accountable only to herself. The next morning, Hannah rose early and decided to walk into town for supplies. Her inheritance included enough money to last several months, but she knew she would eventually need to find a way to support herself. The walk took nearly an hour, giving her time to appreciate the wild beauty of the Idaho landscape, so different from the manicured gardens and crowded streets she'd known. The general store was already busy when she arrived. Hannah stood near the entrance, suddenly aware of the challenge ahead. How would she communicate her needs? In the past, her mother had always done the shopping, sparing Hannah the awkward exchanges. "Miss Lawson." The familiar voice cut through her anxiety. Thomas Caldwell stood near the counter, his arms filled with packages. He set them down and approached her. "Getting settled in all right?" he asked. Hannah nodded, then hesitantly held up her slate with a list of supplies she needed. Tom glanced at it. "Mind if I help? Mrs. Daniels runs this place, and she's got ears like a fox but the patience of a startled rattlesnake." Hannah smiled at the description and nodded gratefully. Tom called out to the stern-looking woman behind the counter. "Mrs. Daniels, this here's Miss Lawson. She's taken over Joseph's old place. She needs a few things to get settled." Mrs. Daniels scrutinized Hannah. "Joseph's niece. He mentioned you in his letters, said you were." She trailed off, seemingly unsure how to politely reference Hannah's muteness. "Miss Lawson communicates just fine with this," Tom said, indicating the slate. "She's made a list of what she needs. Mrs. Daniels took the slate, read it quickly, and began gathering the items. "You writing a book on this thing?" she asked, not unkindly. "Must go through a lot of chalk." Hannah smiled and nodded. "Well, chalk we got plenty of, and slates too if you need another. Mrs. Daniels efficiently collected everything on Hannah's list. Your uncle was a good customer, always paid on time. I'm assuming you'll want to set up an account like he had, Hannah wrote. Yes, please. I can pay for today's purchases now. As Mrs. Daniels tallied her purchases, Tom finished gathering his own supplies. I'm heading back toward your way, he said to Hannah. I could give you a ride if you'd like, save you the walk with all these packages. Hannah hesitated. She just met this man yesterday. Back east, accepting such an offer would have been considered forward, possibly even dangerous. But this wasn't Boston, and something about Thomas Caldwell's straightforward manner put her at ease, she wrote. That would be very kind. Thank you. Tom's wagon was parked outside, already loaded with his own supplies. He helped Hannah up onto the seat and secured her packages in the back before climbing up beside her. Beautiful day, he commented as they left town. Too nice to spend walking with heavy packages. Hannah nodded in agreement, then reached for her slate. She paused, wondering what to write. There were so many questions she wanted to ask about this place, about him, about what kind of life she might build here. Finally, she wrote. Have you lived here long? Tom glanced at her slate. Born and raised about 20 miles from here. My pa started the ranch when I was just a boy. Took it over 5 years ago when he passed. She wrote again. Do you have family nearby? A shadow crossed Tom's face. Not anymore. My ma died when I was young. My sister married a fellow from Denver and moved there. It's just me now. He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. But that's how it goes out here. Folks make their own way. Hannah understood that sentiment all too well. She'd watched others her age marry and start families, knowing her chances of the same were slim. Few men wanted a wife who couldn't speak, no matter how well she managed otherwise. They fell into a comfortable silence as the wagon rumbled along the rutted road. Hannah found herself studying Tom's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners as he squinted against the sun. He was handsome in a rugged, unaffected way. As they approached her cabin, Tom slowed the horses. Mind if I ask you something, Miss Lawson? Hannah nodded for him to continue. Have you always been unable to speak? Since birth, I mean, she nodded again. But you can hear just fine. Another nod. Tom seemed to be considering something. My sister went to a special school back east for a couple years. There was a deaf girl there who used hand signals instead of talking. Some kind of sign language, they called it. Ever learn anything like that? Hannah's eyes widened. She wrote quickly. Yes, I know some signs, but no one here would understand them. Tom read her response and grinned. Well, I'm a quick study with most things. Maybe you could teach me a few. Might be easier than writing everything down all the time. Hannah stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. In her 22 years, no one outside her immediate family had ever offered to learn signs for her benefit. Most people expected her to adapt to their ways of communicating, not the other way around, she wrote. You would do that. Why not? Tom shrugged. Seems practical. As they reached her cabin, Tom helped unload her purchases and carried them inside. I should get going, he said, lingering at the door. Got chores waiting back at the ranch. He hesitated. I usually come into town on Saturdays. Maybe I could stop by then if that's all right. You could show me some of those signs. Hannah wrote. I would like that very much. Tom smiled. Saturday it is then. Take care, Miss Lawson. After he left, Hannah stood in the doorway watching his wagon disappear around the bend in the road. For the first time since arriving in Challis, she felt something like hope fluttering in her chest. Perhaps here, in this remote corner of Idaho territory, she might find something she'd never quite had before: acceptance. The days until Saturday passed slowly. Hannah busied herself making the cabin more habitable. exploring the surrounding woods, and planning what signs she would teach Tom first. She had learned American Sign Language at a special school in Boston that her parents had scraped together the money to send her to for 2 precious years. But without regular practice, she worried her skills had grown rusty. On Saturday morning, Hannah woke with the sun and spent more time than usual arranging her hair. She chose her blue calico dress, the one her mother had always said brought out the color in her eyes, and pinned a small cameo at her throat. When she caught herself fussing with her appearance, Hannah paused, startled by her own behavior. Was she trying to impress Thomas Caldwell? The thought made her blush. A man like him surely had his pick of women in the area, women who could speak, laugh, and sing. Women whose futures didn't depend on chalk and slate. Still, she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt when she heard the sound of wagon wheels approaching around midday. She smoothed her skirts one last time and went to the door. Tom looked different today. He'd traded his work clothes for clean trousers and a pressed shirt. His hair was neatly combed beneath his hat, and he'd trimmed his mustache. He carried a small package under one arm. "Good afternoon, Miss Lawson," he said, removing his hat. "Hope I'm not intruding." Hannah shook her head and gestured for him to enter. "Brought you something," Tom said, holding out the package. "Thought it might be useful." Hannah unwrapped it to find a new slate larger than her current one and several boxes of chalk in different colors. She looked up at him, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. She reached for her old slate and wrote, "Thank you, this is very kind. Figured if I'm going to learn your signs, you might need to draw some of them for me," Tom explained. "The colors might help make it clearer." Hannah nodded, then set aside the slate. Taking a deep breath, she raised her hands and made a simple sign, bringing her fingers to her lips and extending her hand outward toward Tom, the sign for thank you. "That means thank you?" Tom asked, watching intently. Hannah nodded, then repeated the gesture more slowly. Tom mimicked the movement. Like this, his execution was a bit awkward but unmistakable. Hannah smiled broadly and nodded, then clapped her hands silently in encouragement. "What else can you show me?" Tom asked, his enthusiasm evident. For the next hour, Hannah taught him basic signs. Hello, goodbye, yes, no, please. Tom proved to be an attentive student, repeating each gesture until he got it right, asking questions about the logic behind certain movements. When he successfully strung together "Hello, my name is Tom," Hannah's face lit up with delight. "This is something else," Tom said, flexing his fingers. "Never thought about talking with my hands before. Must be tiring sometimes." Hannah shrugged, then wrote on her new slate, "No more tiring than talking, I imagine. Would you like some coffee?" "That would be mighty nice, thank you," Tom replied, signing "thank you" at the end, which made Hannah smile again. As she prepared coffee, Tom wandered around the cabin, examining the few personal touches she'd added to her uncle's spare furnishings: a sampler she'd stitched hanging on one wall, a small collection of books on a shelf, a porcelain figurine of a bird on the mantel. "You like to read?" he asked when she returned with 2 cups of coffee. Hannah nodded enthusiastically. "What kinds of books?" she wrote. "All kinds. History, poetry, novels. Do you read?" Tom took the coffee she offered. "Not as much as I should, probably. Got through most of Dickens one winter when we were snowed in for weeks. Ma used to read to us every night, though," Hannah wrote. "I could lend you a book if you like." "Might take you up on that," Tom said. "Days are getting shorter now. Winter nights get long around here." They spent the afternoon together, Hannah teaching Tom more signs and Tom telling her about the area, the best places to gather berries, which neighbors were friendliest, what to expect when winter came. "Winters are harsh here," he warned. "Not like back east, I'd imagine. You should start stockpiling firewood soon. I could help with that if you'd like." Hannah wrote. "I would appreciate that very much. I'm not sure I know what to prepare for." "I could come by next Saturday," Tom offered. "Bring my axe and show you what trees are best for burning." And so began a pattern. Every Saturday, Tom would arrive at Hannah's cabin, sometimes with small gifts, a jar of honey from his own bees, a book he'd borrowed from the schoolteacher in town, a carved wooden box for her chalk. They would spend the afternoon together, with Hannah teaching Tom more signs, and Tom helping Hannah prepare for the coming winter. As the weeks passed, Hannah found herself looking forward to Saturdays with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. She knew it was dangerous to become too attached to Thomas Caldwell. Men like him didn't marry women who couldn't speak. At best, she might hope for friendship, and even that was more than she dared dream of before coming to Challis. The first snow came early that year, in late October. Hannah woke to find the world transformed, white and silent. She stood at her window, watching fat flakes drift from a pewter sky, and wondered if Tom would still come. The road would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous. By noon, the snow was ankle-deep and still falling. Hannah told herself it was foolish to expect him and tried to ignore her disappointment. She was gathering kindling near the cabin when she heard the now familiar sound of Tom's wagon. He appeared through the curtain of snow, his coat collar turned up against the cold, his horse picking its way carefully along the snow-covered road. Hannah's heart leapt at the sight of him, and she hurried to meet the wagon. "Wouldn't miss our lesson," Tom called out as he approached. "Though I can't stay as long today. Need to get back before the snow gets worse." Hannah signed, "Thank you for coming," her hands shaping the words they'd practiced. Tom had proven to be an excellent student, quickly picking up the signs she taught him, and even studying a small manual of sign language she'd brought from Boston. "Wouldn't want you to think I'd forgotten," Tom said, climbing down from the wagon. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a small package. "Brought you something. An early Christmas gift, I suppose, in case the snow keeps me away for a while." Hannah unwrapped the package to find a beautifully bound journal with blank pages and a fountain pen. "Thought maybe you could write more than just quick notes with this," Tom explained. "Maybe your thoughts and such. Must be a lot in your head that doesn't fit on a slate." Hannah was deeply touched by his understanding. She tucked the journal under her arm and signed "Thank you" again, adding the sign for friend, bringing her two index fingers together side by side, then reversing them. "Friend," Tom repeated, mimicking the sign. "That's what we are, isn't it?" But there was something in his eyes that suggested he might be hoping for a different word. Hannah felt her cheeks grow warm, and it had nothing to do with the cold. She nodded, then hesitantly added the sign for good, bringing her right hand, fingers extended, to her lips and then moving it downward toward Tom, palm up. "Good friend," Tom translated, smiling. They spent a shorter time together than usual, conscious of the worsening weather. Before leaving, Tom made her promise to stay warm and not venture too far from the cabin until the snow stopped. "I'll come check on you as soon as the weather clears," he assured her. "If you need anything before then, light your lantern and put it in the window facing my ranch. I'll be watching." Hannah nodded, warmed by his concern. As his wagon disappeared into the swirling snow, she clutched the journal to her chest, already planning what she would write in it. The storm lasted 3 days, burying the countryside under 2 feet of snow. Hannah remained comfortable in her cabin, with plenty of firewood and supplies thanks to Tom's preparation. On the 4th day, the sun emerged, creating a dazzling landscape of white broken only by the dark lines of pine trees. Hannah had just finished breakfast when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She hurried to the window, expecting to see Tom, but instead saw a stranger, a middle-aged man bundled against the cold, riding a snow-dusted bay. The man dismounted and approached her door, knocking firmly. Hannah opened it cautiously. "Miss Lawson?" the man asked. When Hannah nodded, he continued. "Name's Ellis. I work for Tom Caldwell. He sent me to check on you. Would have come himself, but he's laid up with a bad leg." Hannah's concern must have shown on her face because Ellis quickly added, "Nothing too serious. Horse spooked during the storm and threw him. Doctor says he'll be fine with rest, but he can't ride for a few days. Ask me to make sure you're all right and to bring you this." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Hannah opened it to find a note in Tom's surprisingly neat handwriting. "Hannah, sorry I couldn't come myself. Nothing to worry about, just a bruised leg and wounded pride. Ellis will bring you anything you need. If you'd like to write me back, he'll wait. I miss our lessons. Been practicing my signs so I don't forget them. Your friend, Tom." Hannah smiled at the note, relief washing over her. She gestured for Ellis to wait while she fetched her new journal. She wrote a quick response, thanking Tom for sending Ellis and expressing concern for his injury. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "I miss our lessons too. The cabin feels too quiet even for me. Please take care of yourself and don't rush your recovery. I'll be here when you're well." She signed it simply, Hannah, and handed it to Ellis, who promised to deliver it directly to Tom. After Ellis left, Hannah stood at her window for a long time, watching the sun glint off the snow and thinking about Thomas Caldwell. In just a few months, he had become central to her life in a way she hadn't anticipated. The thought of him injured, unable to ride over to see her, created an ache in her chest she couldn't ignore. That night, she began writing in earnest in the journal Tom had given her. She wrote about her life before coming to Idaho, about her fears and hopes, about the strange and wonderful feeling of finding someone who tried to understand her world. Instead of demanding she conform to his. She wrote things she could never have communicated with her slate, or even with signs, complex thoughts and feelings that required the luxury of time and space to express. The snow began to melt a week later, turning the roads to mud but making travel possible again. Hannah had just returned from gathering firewood when she saw Tom's wagon approaching. Her heart beat faster as she set down her armload of wood and hurried to meet him. Tom's face broke into a wide smile when he saw her. He was thinner than when she'd last seen him, and he moved carefully as he climbed down from the wagon, favoring his right leg. "Miss me?" he asked, signing the question as well as speaking it. Hannah nodded emphatically, then signed, "How is your leg?" "Better every day," Tom replied. "Doc says I'm lucky it wasn't broken. Should be good as new in another week or so." They went inside, and Hannah busied herself making coffee while Tom settled into what had become his chair near the fire. There was something comforting about resuming their routine, as if the storm and separation had been merely a brief interruption in the natural order of things. "I've been thinking," Tom said as Hannah handed him his coffee. "Winter's just starting. Roads will be bad more often than not for the next few months. Might be harder for me to get over here regularly." Hannah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "So I was wondering," Tom continued, "if maybe you'd consider coming to stay at my place for a spell. It's bigger than this cabin, plenty of room. My housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, stays there too, so it would all be proper." Hannah stared at him, surprised by the offer. "Just until spring," Tom added quickly. "Would be safer for you and we could continue our lessons." "I've gotten kind of used to them." Hannah reached for her slate, her mind racing. The proper thing would be to decline. A single woman didn't stay at a single man's home, housekeeper or no. But the prospect of a lonely winter in the cabin, with only occasional visits from Tom if the weather permitted, was disheartening. She wrote, People would talk. Tom shrugged. People always talk. Question is whether we care more about their opinions than our own comfort and happiness. Hannah considered this. Back east, such an arrangement would have been scandalous. But here in the Idaho territory, conventional rules sometimes bent to accommodate the harsh realities of frontier life. And Tom was right, the winter would be safer and less lonely at his ranch. She wrote, "When would you like me to come?" Tom's face lit up. "How about tomorrow? I can help you pack whatever you want to bring. The rest can stay here. We can check on the place whenever the weather allows." And so, the next day, Hannah found herself moving temporarily to the Caldwell ranch. It was indeed larger than her cabin, a proper two-story house with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, it was comfortably furnished, with a large kitchen, a dining room, and a parlor with stuffed chairs and a piano. "My mother's," Tom explained when he caught Hannah looking at the instrument. "Do you play?" Hannah shook her head. "Neither do I," Tom admitted. "Seems a shame to let it sit silent, but I never had the knack for it." Mrs. Fletcher, the housekeeper, was a brisk, efficient woman in her 60s who showed Hannah to a pleasant bedroom on the 2nd floor. "Mr. Caldwell said you'd be staying through the winter," she said, eyeing Hannah with undisguised curiosity. "He mentioned you can't speak." Hannah nodded, reaching for her slate to explain, but Mrs. Fletcher waved it away. "No need for that. Mr. Caldwell explained everything. Said you use hand signs and that he's learning them. Never heard of such a thing, but then, there's all sorts of new ideas these days." She straightened a pillow on the bed. "Dinner's at 6. Hope you like beef stew. It's what was planned before I knew you were coming." Hannah smiled and nodded, signing "thank you" without thinking. To her surprise, Mrs. Fletcher imitated the sign. "That means thank you, doesn't it?" "Mr. Caldwell showed me that one. Said I might find it useful." Hannah nodded again, touched that Tom had thought to prepare his housekeeper for her arrival. Life at the Caldwell ranch quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm. During the day, Tom attended to his ranch duties while Hannah helped Mrs. Fletcher with household tasks. In the evenings, they would gather in the parlor, where Hannah continued teaching Tom sign language, now with Mrs. Fletcher occasionally joining in. Tom proved to be an even more dedicated student with daily practice. Within weeks, they were able to have simple conversations entirely in sign, though Hannah still used her slate for complex ideas. Mrs. Fletcher picked up some basic signs as well, enough to communicate household matters without Hannah needing to write everything down. As Christmas approached, the weather worsened, confirming the wisdom of Hannah's temporary relocation. Heavy snows isolated the ranch for days at a time, but with plentiful supplies, a warm house, and good company, Hannah found herself happier than she'd been in years. One evening, as they sat before the fire after Mrs. Fletcher had retired, Tom turned to Hannah with an unusually serious expression. "Can I ask you something personal?" he signed. Hannah nodded, curious. "Have you ever—" He hesitated, his hands faltering. "Have you ever wished you could speak? Do you ever wonder what your voice would sound like?" The question caught Hannah off guard. She reached for her journal, which she'd taken to keeping nearby for moments when signs weren't enough, and wrote, "Sometimes, when I was younger, I wished for it desperately. I imagined conversations I would have, songs I would sing. But as I grew older, I came to accept that silence is part of who I am. I don't know if I even have a voice inside me. If I do, it found other ways to express itself." Tom read her words thoughtfully. "I think I understand," he signed. "It's like my limp right now. At first, it was all I could think about, how I couldn't do things the way I always had. But then I started finding different ways to get things done. It's not the same, I know. My leg will heal. But the principle is similar," Hannah wrote. "We adapt to our circumstances." "Yes," Tom agreed. Then, after a moment, "I've been meaning to tell you something. I got a letter from my sister in Denver. She's having a baby in the spring and she wants me to come visit." Hannah smiled and signed congratulations, but felt a twinge of something like disappointment. Tom would be leaving when the weather improved. "I was thinking," Tom continued, "that maybe you might consider coming with me to Denver." Hannah's eyes widened in surprise. "It's a big city," Tom explained. "They have schools there, doctors, all sorts of people. Maybe even others who use sign language like you do. Might be nice for you to meet them." Hannah considered the idea. She'd never been further west than Idaho. Denver was supposedly a civilized city with amenities she'd grown used to in Boston. But there was something else in Tom's invitation, something unspoken that made her heart beat faster. She wrote, "Are you asking me to accompany you as a friend, or is there another reason?" Tom's cheeks reddened slightly. "Well, I suppose that depends on how you might feel about another reason." Hannah set down her journal and pencil. Slowly, deliberately, she signed the words they'd learned just the previous week. "I care for you." Tom's face broke into a smile. "I care for you too, Hannah, more than I expected to when I first helped you with that trunk in town." Hannah picked up her journal again. "I never thought anyone would want to learn my language. Never thought anyone would try to understand my world instead of just expecting me to live in theirs." "Your world is fascinating," Tom signed. "The way you see things, the way you express yourself without words, it's like discovering a whole new country." He hesitated, then added, "I think I'm falling in love with that country and with its sole inhabitant." Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. Quickly she wrote, "Are you sure? A man like you could have any woman. One who could speak to you, sing to your children, call your name." Tom reached across and took her hand. "I don't need to hear your voice to know your heart, Hannah. You've shown me who you are in 1,000 ways that have nothing to do with speaking." "And as for children," he smiled, "we'd teach them both languages. They'd be richer for it." Hannah stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Was Thomas Caldwell actually suggesting a future together? "A family, I know it's sudden," Tom said, seeming to sense her thoughts. "And I'm not asking for an answer now. Just think about coming to Denver with me. We could see how things develop." Hannah nodded, unable to trust herself to write or sign anything coherent. Tom squeezed her hand once more, then stood. "It's getting late. We both should get some sleep." At the door to the parlor, he turned back. "Just so you know, I meant what I said. I'm falling in love with you, Hannah Lawson, and it has nothing to do with whether you can speak and everything to do with who you are." After he left, Hannah sat before the dying fire for a long time, her thoughts in turmoil. Could she really build a life with someone? Could she be a wife, a mother? She'd abandoned such dreams years ago, accepting her solitary fate with as much grace as she could muster. But Thomas Caldwell had changed everything. He'd looked at her silence and seen not a deficit, but simply a different way of being in the world. He'd entered her silent country without complaint, learning its language and customs, finding beauty where others saw only limitation. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. Hannah woke early and dressed carefully in her best dress, a forest green wool that she'd bought in Challis before the first snow. She'd given Mrs. Fletcher the day off to visit her sister in town, so Hannah busied herself preparing a special breakfast for Tom. He appeared in the kitchen doorway just as she was taking biscuits from the oven. "Merry Christmas," he signed, then spoke aloud. "Something smells wonderful." Hannah smiled and signed "Merry Christmas" in return. She'd set the table with the good china Mrs. Fletcher kept for special occasions and had even found a sprig of holly to place in the center. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," Tom said, looking pleased nonetheless. Hannah signed, "I wanted to," then gestured for him to sit down. After breakfast, they exchanged gifts in the parlor. Hannah had embroidered a handkerchief for Tom, stitching his initials in one corner. Tom seemed genuinely touched by the gift, immediately tucking it into his shirt pocket. "My turn," he said, handing her a small box. Inside, Hannah found a silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found it empty. "I thought maybe someday it could hold a photograph," Tom explained, "of someone important to you." Hannah smiled and immediately fastened the locket around her neck. She signed "beautiful" and "thank you," touching the locket with gentle fingers. "There's one more thing," Tom said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out another small box and held it for a moment, seeming to gather his courage. "I know I said I wouldn't ask for an answer about Denver yet, but I've been doing some thinking and I don't want to wait." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small sapphire. "This was my mother's. She told me before she died to give it to the woman I couldn't imagine living without." He took a deep breath. "I can't imagine my life without you in it now, Hannah. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Hannah stared at the ring, then at Tom's earnest face. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind: practical concerns about marriage to a mute woman, fears about the future, doubts about her ability to be the kind of wife a rancher needed. But beyond all those thoughts was a simpler truth. She loved Thomas Caldwell. Loved his kindness, his determination, his willingness to learn her language and enter her silent world. Loved the way he saw her not as broken or incomplete, but as whole and worthy of love. She raised her hands and slowly, deliberately signed the word they'd learned just the week before. "Yes." Tom's face broke into a radiant smile. "Yes, you'll marry me," Hannah nodded, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. Tom slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace. "I promise to keep learning your language," he whispered against her hair. "To always try to understand, even when it's difficult. To be patient and never make you feel less because you can't speak." Hannah pulled back and signed. "And I promise to always find ways to show you my heart, even without words." They were married in the parlor of the Caldwell Ranch on New Year's Day, 1879. The ceremony was small, just Mrs. Fletcher, Mr. Peterson the solicitor, and Pastor Williams from the church in Challis. The pastor had been dubious at first about performing a ceremony for a bride who couldn't speak her vows, but Tom had insisted that Hannah's signs were as valid as spoken words. "She'll sign her vows and I'll translate," Tom had explained. "God sees the heart, not just the lips, doesn't he?" The pastor had reluctantly agreed, and when the moment came for Hannah to make her promises, the simple dignity with which she signed her vows moved even the skeptical clergyman to tears. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Hannah and Tom settled into married life with a naturalness that surprised them both. What had begun as sign language lessons evolved into a unique form of communication that blended signs, written words, and the unspoken understanding that grows between people who truly see each other. Mrs. Fletcher continued to manage the household, though Hannah gradually took on more responsibilities as she learned the rhythms of ranch life. To everyone's surprise, the older woman became a dedicated student of sign language, practicing diligently until she could carry on basic conversations with Hannah without Tom's translation. "It's like learning to play the piano at my age," she confessed to Hannah one day. "Fingers don't move like they used to, but it's worth the effort. Never thought I'd learn a foreign language at 63. As April turned to May, Tom began making preparations for their journey to Denver. Hannah found herself both excited and nervous about the trip. She'd be meeting Tom's sister and brother-in-law, traveling by train for the first time, experiencing a city that was by all accounts growing rapidly into a metropolitan center. "Rebecca will love you," Tom assured her when she expressed anxiety about meeting his sister. "I've told her all about you in my letters. She's eager to meet the woman who's made her brother so happy." The journey to Denver took 3 days, first by stagecoach to the nearest railroad station, then by train across Wyoming territory and into Colorado. Hannah found the experience exhilarating, watching the landscape change from the rugged mountains of Idaho to the high plains of Wyoming to the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies. Denver was indeed a city on the rise. With nearly 30,000 inhabitants, it boasted paved streets, grand hotels, and amenities Hannah hadn't seen since leaving Boston. Tom's sister Rebecca lived with her husband Edward in a handsome house not far from the center of town. Rebecca, heavily pregnant with her first child, welcomed them warmly. "Tom's letters were full of you," she told Hannah, speaking slowly and clearly. "He mentioned you use sign language. He's been teaching himself from a book I sent him." Hannah nodded, pleased that Tom had shared this aspect of their life with his sister. "I hope you'll teach me a few signs while you're here," Rebecca continued. "It seems a useful skill, especially with a baby coming. They can't talk either, at least not at first." Hannah smiled and signed, "I would be happy to," with Tom translating. Their 2-week visit to Denver proved to be a turning point in Hannah's life. Through Rebecca, who was involved in various charitable endeavors, Hannah was introduced to a small school for deaf children that had recently been established in the city. There, for the first time since leaving Boston, Hannah met others who communicated as she did. The school's director, a Miss Harrington, was particularly interested in Hannah's story. "Most of our students are deaf as well as mute," she explained. "It's unusual to find someone who can hear perfectly well but cannot speak. Have you ever been examined by a specialist?" Hannah shook her head. The doctors in Boston had declared her condition a birth defect, untreatable and permanent. Her parents had eventually accepted this verdict and focused on helping her communicate in other ways. "There have been advancements in understanding such conditions," Miss Harrington said. "If you're interested, I could arrange for you to meet with Dr. Emerson. He's done remarkable work with children who have various speech impediments." Hannah looked to Tom, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Might be worth learning more," he signed, "even if nothing comes of it." The meeting with Dr. Emerson was both enlightening and emotional for Hannah. After a thorough examination, he explained that her muteness likely resulted from a physical anomaly in her vocal cords, not a neurological issue as had been previously assumed. "In some cases, surgical intervention can help," he told her, with Tom by her side. "But I must be honest, the procedure carries risks and might not result in full speech capability. At your age, the chances of dramatic improvement are less than they would be for a child." Hannah signed her questions, with Tom translating. Could she make sounds at all? Would she be able to speak words people could understand? What were the dangers of surgery? Dr. Emerson answered each question honestly, neither raising false hopes nor dismissing the possibility of some improvement. "The decision is entirely yours," he concluded. "You've built a life and found ways to communicate effectively. Surgery would be an option to consider, not a necessity to correct something wrong with you." That night in their hotel room, Hannah and Tom discussed what they had learned. Hannah wrote in her journal, "All my life, I believed my silence was immutable, a fixed star around which I built my identity. Now I learn it might be changeable, at least in part. I'm not sure how to feel about this. Part of me wants to try to hear my own voice, to speak Tom's name aloud. But another part fears change, fears losing the person I've always been. What if I gained speech but lost something essential about myself in the process?" Tom read her words thoughtfully. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," he signed. You don't need to change for me or anyone else. But if it's something you want for yourself, then we'll find a way to make it happen." Hannah closed her journal and signed, "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need," Tom replied. "Your voice, whether it comes through your hands or your throat, is yours alone. No one else should decide how it speaks." Their last few days in Denver were filled with a mixture of sightseeing, visits to Rebecca, whose baby, a boy, arrived just before they were due to leave, and Hannah's continued visits to the school for the deaf, where she found herself drawn to the children who were learning to navigate a world that often overlooked them. On their final day, Hannah made her decision. She would not pursue surgery, at least not now. The risks seemed too great, the outcome too uncertain, and she had come to value her unique form of communication. With Tom, with Mrs. Fletcher, and now with the connections she'd made in Denver, her silent world had expanded in ways she'd never imagined possible. "I'm at peace with who I am," she wrote to Tom. "My hands have become my voice, and you've learned to hear them. That seems like its own kind of miracle." Tom nodded, visibly relieved. "I was worried you might feel pressured to change," he admitted. "I want you to know that I fell in love with you exactly as you are." The journey back to Idaho was quieter than their trip to Denver, both of them contemplating the experiences they'd shared and the decisions they'd made. As the train carried them westward, Hannah found herself watching the passing landscape with new eyes. The vast expanses of Wyoming Territory, the rugged mountains of Idaho, these were no longer just places on a map, but parts of a world that was opening to her in unexpected ways. By the time they reached the Caldwell Ranch, it was early June. The ranch hands welcomed them back with a small celebration, many of them having learned basic signs during the months Hannah had lived there before the wedding. Even gruff old Jenkins from the livery stable made an attempt to sign "Welcome Home," though his execution made Hannah smile. Summer passed in a blur of activity. The ranch demanded constant attention, and Hannah threw herself into learning every aspect of it. She proved to have a natural affinity for bookkeeping, taking over the ranch accounts with an efficiency that impressed even Mrs. Fletcher. In late August, Hannah made a discovery that would change their lives forever. She'd been feeling unwell for several weeks, tired, nauseated in the mornings, strangely sensitive to certain smells. When she finally consulted the doctor in Challis, his diagnosis confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was expecting a child. The news filled Hannah with a mixture of joy and terror. A baby. She would be a mother. The prospect was both wondrous and daunting. How would she call out to a child who wandered too close to danger? How would she sing lullabies or whisper words of comfort in the night? When she shared the news with Tom, his face lit up with such pure happiness that some of her fears subsided. "We'll figure it out together," he signed. "Our child will have the best of both worlds, spoken words and silent ones." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Hannah's body changed, growing rounder as the child within her developed. Tom became almost comically protective, insisting she rest frequently and avoid any strenuous work around the ranch. Mrs. Fletcher, too, hovered like a mother hen, preparing special dishes to tempt Hannah's sometimes fickle appetite. As her due date approached in early spring, Hannah began preparing a nursery in the room adjacent to theirs. She sewed tiny garments, filled a bookshelf with children's stories, and fashioned mobiles to hang above the crib Tom had built with his own hands. One evening, as they sat before the fire in what had become their nightly ritual, Hannah placed Tom's hand on her swollen belly just in time to feel the baby kick. Tom's expression of wonder made Hannah's heart swell with love. "I've been thinking about names," Tom signed. "If it's a boy, maybe Joseph after your uncle, If it's a girl, perhaps Catherine after my mother. Hannah nodded, then signed. Perfect. Labor began on a clear morning in March 1880, just as the first wildflowers were beginning to appear in the meadows around the ranch. Mrs. Fletcher sent for the midwife from Challis, while Tom paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, allowed in only occasionally to hold Hannah's hand and offer encouragement. After 14 hours of labor, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the midwife placed him in her arms, Hannah felt a surge of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. This tiny person, with Tom's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair like her own, was there's a perfect blend of them both. Tom's face, when he was finally allowed to enter, reflected the same awe Hannah felt. "He's beautiful," he whispered, gently touching his son's tiny hand. "Joseph Thomas Caldwell, a fine name for a fine boy." As the midwife and Mrs. Fletcher busied themselves cleaning up, Tom sat beside Hannah on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, both of them gazing at their newborn son. "You know," Tom said softly, "I was thinking about how we met, me helping you with that trunk, not knowing a single sign." He smiled at the memory. "I never could have imagined then where we'd end up, that learning your language would lead to this." He gestured to encompass Hannah, the baby, the room, their life together. Hannah shifted the baby to one arm so she could sign with her free hand. "Best decision I ever made," she signed, coming to Challis. "Best decision I ever made," Tom replied, "sitting beside you every day until I learned your signs." The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. Joseph grew into a sturdy, curious boy who seemed to move effortlessly between the spoken and signed worlds of his parents. By age 3, he was equally fluent in both languages, often serving as a bridge between Hannah and visitors who couldn't sign. When Joseph was 4, Hannah gave birth to twin girls, Elizabeth and Sarah. Like their brother, they grew up bilingual in speech and sign, their small hands forming words almost as soon as they could grasp objects. Tom expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and hiring additional hands. Hannah's accounting skills helped the business prosper, and she became known in Challis not as the mute woman but as Mrs. Caldwell, who keeps the best books in the county. The little school for the deaf in Denver remained a connection to a wider world. Hannah corresponded regularly with Miss Harrington, and the family made annual trips to the city, where Hannah volunteered at the school, teaching the children and sharing her experiences of building a full life in a world that often undervalued those who were different. In 1885, Hannah made a decision that surprised even Tom. After much reflection and correspondence with Dr. Emerson, she chose to undergo the surgery he had described years earlier. The procedure was not without risks, but medical advancements had improved the outlook for success. "Are you sure?" Tom signed when she told him. "You know it doesn't matter to me either way." Hannah nodded decisively. "I want to try," she signed. "Not to be different, but to explore all possibilities. If it doesn't work, I've lost nothing. If it does, I gain one more way to connect with our children, with the world." The surgery was performed in Denver that summer. The recovery was difficult, with weeks of pain and uncertainty. At first, it seemed the procedure might not have been successful. Hannah could produce only raspy, unintelligible sounds that frustrated and discouraged her. But Tom remained steadfast. "Keep trying," he encouraged. "Your hands were clumsy too when you first taught me to sign." Any new skill takes practice. Slowly, with daily exercises and the help of a speech therapist from the school for the deaf, Hannah began to produce sounds that resembled words. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was husky and halting, nothing like the clear tones she had imagined in her dreams as a girl. Yet the first time she managed to say, "Tom," aloud, Her husband's eyes filled with tears. "The most beautiful sound I've ever heard," he told her. Hannah never achieved fluent speech. Her vocabulary remained limited, her pronunciation sometimes difficult for strangers to understand. But she could say her children's names, could whisper, "I love you" to Tom in the darkness, could join in simple songs around the family piano that no longer sat silent. Yet sign language remained her primary form of communication, the language in which she felt most fully herself. And Tom, true to his promise made years earlier on a snowy Christmas day, continued to hear her hands, understanding her thoughts and feelings as completely as if they had been spoken aloud. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th dawned, the Caldwell family stood as a testament to the power of truly seeing another person, of valuing differences rather than merely tolerating them, of learning new languages, both literal and figurative, to bridge the gaps between souls. In 1905, when Hannah was 49 and Tom 53, they celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought together their children: Joseph, now running much of the ranch operation, Elizabeth teaching at the school in Challis, Sarah studying medicine in Denver, Mrs. Fletcher, still spry at 90, and many friends from Challis and beyond. After dinner, as twilight settled over the ranch, Tom raised his glass for a toast. "To Hannah," he said, "who taught me that the most important things in life are often expressed without words." Hannah smiled at her husband across the table, remembering that first day in Challis when he had offered to carry her trunk. She raised her own glass and, in her seldom used voice, said simply, "To understanding." Later that night, as they stood on the porch watching the stars emerge above the Idaho mountains, Tom signed a question he had asked many years before. "Do you ever regret it, coming here, marrying a cowboy who didn't know a single sign?" Hannah shook her head and signed her reply. "Never. You learned to hear me when no one else would try. You sat beside me every day until you understood. How could I regret the greatest gift I've ever received?" Tom drew her close, and together they watched the night sky. Two people who had found a language uniquely their own, one built of signs and silence, patience and perseverance, and a love that had never needed words to make itself understood.